Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. Today, thanks to channel patron Jeff, we're looking at the Schiit Magni Heresy amplifier. This is a $99 headphone amplifier and preamplifier with a brother called the Magni 3 Plus, which is almost identical in the sense that it has the same power output, the same price tag, a different color scheme, and a different topology, in other words, the way the actual amplifier works. So the question for today's review is the Heresy the best headphone amplifier under $100 US? Let's take a look and find out. As I've already alluded to, the Heresy is designed using a different topology to the Magni 3 Plus. Now, when I'm using the word topology, what that means is that in the case of the Magni 3 Plus, it's designed using what's called a discrete circuit. And that means every single piece of the amplification circuit is made of individual components such as transistors, capacitors, resistors, etc. In the case of the Heresy, Schiit have gone against their own philosophies that they've strictly adhered to for all of their previous products and made an amplifier that uses op-amps, or integrated circuits as they're often known. So the idea of an op-amp or an integrated circuit is that all of those individual components like transistors, capacitors, resistors, etc., they're all compiled into a single chip, in this case an op-amp. So the Heresy is called the Heresy because it essentially goes against Schiit's own philosophies, or religion if you like, and produces an amplifier that is built probably more for measurements than it is purely for sound quality. And Schiit do allude to this on their website, that the Magni 3 Plus and the Heresy sound different, and that the Heresy is specifically built for those that are looking for the best measuring amplifier. But if you read between the lines on the Schiit website, I believe they think the Magni 3 Plus sounds better than the Heresy does. Unfortunately, I don't have the Magni 3 Plus here at the same time to compare. As I mentioned before, this review was made possible by a loan coming from one of the channel patrons, but I was still keen to see how the Magni Heresy performed just on its own merits. As always, let's start by looking at the design of the amplifier. As you can see here, the Heresy is tiny. It's a really small footprint. It's actually smaller in terms of footprint than most smartphones, and total size, it's only a tiny bit bigger than my DAP here, my portable music player. So it's a really tiny device, and it's pretty amazing that this thing can put out over 2 watts of power into low impedance loads. Now, speaking of power, this will provide 2 or 3 times more power than you need for safe listening levels into any load you can put on it, whether that's a 600 ohm Bayer T1 or a 16 ohm pair of IEMs. You're going to have plenty of power for everything you're likely to use it with. Part of that power comes from the huge wall wart that comes with the Heresy. So you can see here, the power supply itself is not dissimilar in size to the actual amplifier. So it's a big power supply, and that's necessary in order to create the sort of power output needed. So it's a 15 volt power output from the power supply, and that gives this a 16 volt DC power swing, plus to minus, from the amplifier itself, and that's where all the power comes from. That said, power isn't everything. So when you see people quoting power in amplifier reviews and talking about how just because it's got enough power, that's going to mean it's a good amplifier, that's far from the truth. Power is often overestimated in terms of how much we actually need for headphones, and as long as you've got more than enough to get to, say, 120 decibels worth of output, you've got plenty of power to allow for the dynamic swings in the music. After that, it's more about how the amplifier is amplifying the signal and reconstructing that louder signal, more so than it is about whether it's got enough power. So coming back to the design of the amplifier, on the front here we've got a 6.3mm headphone output, and we've got the volume control. Now, it's a really nice volume control. I know some people prefer a larger volume knob, but this to me is really comfortable and easy to use, and it's got a really nice smooth turning feel. The other great thing about the volume control is that if you're connecting up IEMs, there's no audible channel imbalance, even right down to the lowest settings, and I was able to get up to probably about a 10 o'clock position comfortably with the AudioFly AF1120 Mark IIs, which are not the most sensitive IEMs on the market, but they're pretty sensitive. So they're a pretty good estimation of most sensitive IEMs out there on the market, and the Magni 3 Heresy was just fine with them because it's obviously using a very high quality volume pot. So kudos to Schiit for actually making it a really high quality volume pot, despite it being a cheap amplifier. If we flip around to the back now, on the back we've got RCA inputs, We've got a gain switch, high and low gain. We've got RCA outputs. Now these are variable RCA outputs. So if you're like me and use active speakers, you can run your active speakers directly from here and control the volume from here. On top of that, when you plug in headphones, it will mute these back outputs. Now, some preamplifiers on the market that are also headphone amplifiers don't mute the outputs at the back, and that's a real drawback because you've got to manually switch your active speakers on or off depending on what you're doing at the time. With the Heresy, there's no such worry. You plug in your headphones, your speakers switch off. You unplug your headphones, your speakers are back on again. So it's a really nice, simple design, but a very effective and practical way to use the amplifier. Finally, we've got a power switch over here, and we've got the power input. One small thing about having the power switch on the back, I'm personally not a fan. I would have liked to see it on the front. The reason for that for me is that I keep most of my equipment under my desk here. I've got a rack that I've built underneath a shelf, and so to reach the power switch on the Heresy, if it's under the desk, I have to reach over the back, in through a whole bunch of cables, and work out where I am and where the switch is. It's not a big deal because the switch is a bit separated from everything else, but it's not ideal for me. So that's just a small point, something that some people might want to keep in mind. Others won't care at all. Some people will leave this amplifier on all the time. I'm personally not one of those people. If the product doesn't have to be on all the time, I prefer to switch it off. Now, speaking of switching it on and off, one thing that's really nice is they've built in a red LED inside the Heresy. So when you switch it on, you're getting this nice red glow through the top cover, not dissimilar to the color of the side plates. So aesthetically, it's a really pleasing amplifier. It looks really striking in the black or the charcoal and the red, and the fact that that's offset by the red light on the inside, I think is a really nice touch. So all in all, there's really nothing you can complain about with the Heresy. For a $99 amp, it's beautifully built, it's beautifully designed, and the only drawback I can find is having this switch on the back, and it's such a minor issue that it's really not worth worrying about. I've already mentioned that this worked really well with my IEMs, and I can equally say that it works beautifully with headphones such as the Focal Clear, the Mesa Empyreans, the DT880 250 ohm, basically you name it, this drives it beautifully. As I'll talk about in a sec, there's a certain characteristic to the sound that initially I wasn't sure if it was going to interfere with certain headphones and create some unwanted tonalities and coloration in certain headphones. But I was really pleased to find that no matter what I plugged into it, the Heresy drove the headphones beautifully and the sound signatures matched up really well. There were none of those what I often call negative synergies between the Heresy and other headphones. Everything just sounded great. So across the board, in terms of compatibility, I can comfortably say this amplifier will drive every single pair of headphones or IEMs you're likely to want to put with it. So from that point of view, it's ticking all the boxes. So the big question now, as always, is what's the sound quality like? The overall tonality of the Heresy is ever so slightly treble forward. It comes across treble forward. Now, if you look at measurements, the frequency response is actually dead flat. So it's not that this is actually boosting any of the frequencies in the frequency range, but what it's doing is the way it's doing the amplification is leading to some slight artifacts, perhaps you could call them, that do lead to a sense of coloration in the sound. As I've already mentioned with the different headphones I've tried, it doesn't actually mean that it's going to affect the sound of your headphones, but there's definitely a character to the sound of the amplifier that some people are going to like and some people may prefer something else. Another part of that character of the amplifier is that the bass is very rich and full. It's not boosted, it's not bloated, but it's certainly got a nice sense of dynamics. And so from that point of view, I'd say the Heresy is going to be instantly engaging and exciting for a lot of people, particularly those that might have a more laid back and potentially a more lean sounding headphone. It's going to give them a bit of extra oomph and a bit of extra energy. So that could be a real positive for some people. I should talk a bit more now though about the character of the amplifier, the character of the sound from the amplifier that I mentioned before. And that is to say that there's a certain digitalness to the sound or an electronicness to the sound that I don't necessarily love about the Heresy. I can't stress enough it's minor. At a $99 price point, it's not something that you should shy away from because of it, but I do want to mention it particularly because the Magni 3 Plus exists in the same market at the same price. So what I'm talking about here with digitalness is the treble emphasis that I mentioned before, or the sense of treble emphasis, comes from the fact that everything's got a very slight digital glare to it, for want of a better word. It's really subtle, but when you move between this and other amplifiers, you can start to hear the difference. And what I'm starting to notice is that I'm hearing this sort of sound in the amplifiers out there that perform really, really well from a measurement point of view. So jumping between the Heresy and the THX 789, I find the same characteristics with the 789. I even found the same characteristics with the Sparkos Labs Aries. Now all three of these amplifiers are built to be extremely clean and exacting from a measurement point of view, but the result is a sound quality that is sometimes a little bit electronic and a little bit analytical. I'm not an electrical engineer, so I don't know the ins and outs of what might be causing this, but I can only assume it comes down to some of the feed-forward approaches that are being used in things like the Heresy and the 789, and potentially also the use of integrated style systems, the op-amp style designs, instead of discrete circuits. Again, I'm just making educated guesses here, but I think there's something going on in terms of the types of circuits used in order to exact this level of performance from a measurement point of view. Now, before I get to my conclusion about whether this is the best $99 amplifier on the market, I should also briefly talk about the soundstage from the Heresy. So the Heresy produces a nice width in soundstage. It's not amazing, but it's solid, and I'd say really good for the $99 price tag. The soundstage hasn't got a great deal of depth, but the width is certainly good. I found that the sense of space between instruments was good, and the ability to hear them separately and focus on where they are in the soundstage was all delivered very well. In comparison with something like the THX 789, you could hear the improvement that the 789 brought in terms of a greater sense of space between instruments and a little bit of extra detail and texture and clarity, but it was a small step up and shows you just how well the Heresy is performing. Now, if you were to ask me if it's worth spending the extra on the 789 from a pure sound quality point of view, I'd say yes, it is. It's a small but significant improvement in sound, and therefore I think it is worth the upgrade, but it's not to say that the Heresy isn't performing extremely well for a $99 headphone amp. In fact, there was one area that I found the Heresy probably outperformed the 789, and that is that whilst it creates a more intimate soundstage that's got a bit less space in it and a little bit less separation between the instruments, the result of that is it produces probably a slightly better focus on the central image of the music. So if you've got a main vocalist, for example, that vocalist for me was ever so slightly more resolved and cleanly defined in space in the Heresy compared to the 789. In all other areas, I think the 789 is comfortably better, but it's really, really impressive that a $99 headphone amp can be getting as close as it is to something that originally cost about $400 US, if my memory serves me correctly.
I know you had your heart broken one too many times, and now it's hard for you to open up. They have been cruel to you, saying things they don't mean. They have been rude to you, disrespect how you feel, but baby, I'll never go that far, 'cause I know better than that. So baby, let me hold you, hold you. I wanna show you how to treat you right, treat you right.
So to sum all this up, I asked the question at the beginning whether the Heresy was the best $99 headphone amplifier on the market. And I'm going to say no, it's not. And the reason I'm going to say no, it's not is that based on what I've read on the Schiit website and the fact that they sort of allude to the fact that the Magni 3 Plus probably sounds a little bit better, and the fact that there is this slight sense of digital glare or whatever you'd like to call it from the Heresy, I think I'd probably lean to the Magni 3 Plus, even though I haven't heard it myself. The Heresy is a beautiful little amplifier for $99. It's wonderfully made. I love the color scheme. The fact that it's a preamp with muting outputs and variable outputs I think is brilliant. So there's so much going for the Heresy, and in isolation, if the Magni 3 Plus didn't exist, the Heresy would be a really strong recommendation from me. But I can't help but think that the discrete circuit of the Magni 3 Plus is going to provide many of the same benefits as the Heresy 3. It definitely has the same power output. It's got all the same features and functionality. The only thing you're missing out on is the color scheme. If you're hooked on that, the Heresy is the only option there. But I think I'd go with the Magni 3 Plus because its sound is most likely going to be slightly more organic and therefore slightly more enjoyable, even if it doesn't measure quite as well as the Heresy. So if you're interested in buying either the Heresy or the Magni 3 Plus, which again, just reminding you, is identical to this in all ways except the internal structure of the amplifier circuit and the color scheme, if you're interested in those, I'll put links down below where you can buy them. Thanks again to channel patron Jeff, who sent this through to me to review, and thanks again to all of the channel patrons who helped to make these reviews possible. For now though, I'm going to say happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.